Universal parks seem to be known for their thrill rides, at least in Florida. Now, is that really true? Sure, you have large coasters like Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket, the Incredible Hulk, and the Velocicoaster, but otherwise, Universal's other rides are targeted towards a family audience. Yet, Universal's definition of a family attraction seems to be different from how Disney is defining one. Attractions like Transformers are certainly accessible, but the 3D film and effects often makes people pretty motion sick. The same is often said for other 3D rides throughout the resort as well. And what about the other coasters? While I don't personally consider them very intense, coasters such as Hagrid's or the Mummy really sit in a gray area between family attraction and intense thrills. I would certainly consider these to be in the same category as other family coasters such as Expedition Everest or Big Thunder Mountain, but even then, there's still a large discrepancy in thrill level between them. The point I would like to make is that even though most of Universal's attractions are aimed towards families, they're also alienating a lot of really young children, as well as the elderly and people with medical conditions that prevent them from experiencing most rides. I often hear people claim that they take their very young children to Disney and then when they're older to Universal, and I completely understand where they're coming from. Where Disney has the advantage is also in these calmer attractions that can be experienced by everyone. Think about the many boat rides or the slow-moving omnimovers, as well as the abundance of shows throughout their parks. If Universal wants to remain competitive and really work towards taking Disney's Orlando market share, then I think that they need to invest in more accessible attractions. Is that to say that they should step away from thrill rides? Well, certainly not. But I can't help but feel that their parks are quite unbalanced in terms of attraction experiences, and so that's what we'll be diving into today. First, let's establish what constitutes a family attraction. This can be a bit difficult to really reach a consensus on, but let's take Pirates of the Caribbean for example. Its drops can be thrilling, but not so intense that any single person in a party wouldn't be able to ride it. Anyone from small children to adults to the elderly are able to experience this attraction. Because it also lacks a height requirement, I believe it's accessible to infants as well. I've never actually seen an infant on this ride, but I have certainly seen them on Disneyland's various Fantasyland dark rides and on Navi River Journey, so I'm assuming that the same applies here. However, where I haven't really seen young children is on Expedition Everest or on Hagrid's. These rides both have their own respective height requirements and are an obvious step up in intensity from other family attractions. I think then that's important to distinguish between a family attraction in general and a family coaster. Obviously, the point of a coaster is to be thrilling, and so the family categorization assumes that riders are able to handle more intense forces. Generally, family coasters seem to be larger than most children's coasters, such as the Barnstormer or Woody Woodpecker's Nuthouse Coaster, but what makes them right for families seems to be both the lack of height and inversions. They're thrilling, but not so intense that a large degree of riders actively choose not to ride. They're accessible to most young children over the age of 5, and can generally be ridden by most adults, except for the most frail of the elderly. The issue with Universal's accessibility is that most of their dark rides end up having similar requirements to their family coasters. Actually, almost every single ride in their parks has a height requirement as well. Otherwise, the abundance of 3D dark rides can often be physically rough, as they throw you around, and, as mentioned earlier, can be nausea-inducing for a large number of guests. If you haven't been on it, I think you'd be surprised at how violent an attraction like Fast and Furious can be. There's just simply very little to do for infants, toddler-aged children, the elderly, and people who are prone to motion sickness, especially in comparison to Disney. Considering that Universal is Disney's greatest competitor, this is an area where they could really improve. If you're watching this, there's a good chance that this likely doesn't affect you, and every ride is pretty accessible. However, I would like to add some perspective as to why this is a problem, and why fixing it works to the benefit of pretty much everyone. First, let me just quickly ask my audience a favor to go ahead and hit the like button. If you did so, I really appreciate it. Now, say for example, you're a family of 3 visiting Universal with a 2-year-old expecting a day of family fun. You choose to go to Islands of Adventure and walk into the park. Once you make your way in, you see the Incredible Hulk to your left, and instead choose to go right as Seuss Landing seems to be more kid-friendly. You walk up to the Cat in the Hat, but are turned away because of the 36-inch height requirement, despite it being an attraction targeted towards children. You manage to get onto One Fish, Two Fish, and then the Carousel, before then backtracking to If I Ran the Zoo, a play area with water features meant for the smallest of children. I have to imagine that the child is having fun, but the parents are probably wanting something more substantial at this point. They walk for 20 minutes in the zoo, letting their child explore. They then make their way out and run into the Seuss Sky Trolley, then being turned away again for the 36-inch height requirement. That's disappointing because they are both family attractions with interesting scenes that this family is not able to experience despite being designed to appeal to young children. The family then moves into the Lost Continent where they can experience Poseidon's Fury, but due to the nature of the experience, is probably upsetting to their child. They then walk into the Wizarding World and can ride absolutely nothing together, though they're probably using the child swap. The same applies with all of Jurassic Park, although they can walk around Camp Jurassic for another 20 minutes or so, just as they did in the zoo. They then encounter Skull Island, which they also cannot experience together. The same then applies with Toon Lagoon, although they can again explore the ship. Finally, they finish off the loop of the park in Marvel Superhero Island, where the only attraction that they can experience together is Stormforce Accelatron. So, did they have a fun day, using the child swap to experience the rides, and utilizing the explorable areas to keep their child happy? Sure, but they only experienced 4 attractions together. Maybe they didn't have a bad day, but then consider that Magic Kingdom contains 17 different attractions without height requirements, not even including the sit-down shows. If you take Universal Studios Florida into account, the park with even fewer thrills, it somehow gets worse. The only attractions without a height requirement are the King and Kodo's Flat Ride and Despicable Me, which is only accessible to really young children in the non-moving seats. Still then, think about traveling with someone who is prone to motion sickness, or who is frail enough to not handle the jarring actions of the rides that simulate movement. I think that there is certainly a case to be made that while alienating, the demographics not able to experience the parks fully are actually pretty small. When you visit Universal, you're expecting a family but also thrilling experience. And so from there the question arises, does it make sense to pivot towards these more accessible attractions when it only affects that really small demographic? Well, I actually think that yes, it does make sense, because it also benefits everyone else as well. I think I can make a good case for that, so let me explain. Something I haven't mentioned yet is the sit-down shows located in the studios. You have Animal Actors, the Horror Makeup Show, and the still relatively new Born Stuntacular. These are all pretty solid experiences at the park, but their presence also highlights how few actual sit-down shows there are. This is something that Islands needs desperately, as the park is sitting with 2 empty theaters. Otherwise, all of the other shows in the park are stand-up streetmosphere, and while not inherently bad, can be quite unpleasant in the 98-degree Florida sun with 100% humidity. There is also the issue of the whole park essentially going down for thunderstorms with the lack of indoor attractions, and covered or indoor shows would help quite a bit. Obviously, sit-down shows work into the conversation about accessibility for park guests, and so this would be a major benefit to them. However, it's also really great to take a break by sitting down in a cool theater to relax and enjoy a fun show, rather than constantly running from ride to ride. The way I see it, including more shows would really benefit every single park guest, and I'm actually quite surprised how much Universal has moved away from them. I think about the first decade of Universal Studios Florida, including shows such as Alfred Hitchcock: The Art of Making Movies, the Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater, the Wild 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 West Stunt Show, Beetlejuice's Graveyard Review, the Ghostbusters Spooktacular, and the later editions of Twister and then Terminator. Not all of these were great, but I would really like to see more high-quality shows that allow visitors to get out of the sun and just relax. Speaking of this era though, I did find it interesting how on the topic of accessibility, these older attractions were actually much more accommodating. If we take Jaws for example, the ride was quite thrilling because of the scenes that played out, but the actual ride vehicle itself was quite accessible to everyone. I can't find any information on if it had a height requirement or not, but according to the Universal website for Jaws in Universal Studios Japan, it doesn't. I'm assuming the same applied here when it existed in the US, and I have to imagine that this was also the case for attractions such as Earthquake or Confrontation. Universal was certainly known for its thrills when it first opened, but it always came from the content of the attractions and not the physical movement of the ride vehicles. More attractions like these are something that I would like to see going forward, acting as thrilling dark rides, but not being physically intense enough for height requirements to be necessary, which would open up the experience to most visitors. It would also help with providing attractions for people who suffer from motion sickness. If you're visiting the parks, especially the studios, you don't have a lot of less intense options that don't include screens. It's essentially just E.T., or if you can tolerate spinning, Men in Black. As someone who almost never feels motion sickness and has a pretty high tolerance for physical thrills, I can say that along with more sit-down shows, these more accessible attractions would benefit me as well. I'm the kind of person who appreciates a well-balanced park, and it would be nice to sit down and experience a calm but fun dark ride after more thrilling experiences. I can say that the Cat in the Hat and the Sky Trolley are some of my favorite and more underrated experiences in the parks, and I really wish that there were more attractions like them. If you recall, I pointed out how they have height requirements earlier, but I hope you see the point that I'm making about slow-moving dark rides in general. They help bring a balance of experiences to a park, just as with sit-down shows, but again, they address the accessibility problem, allowing the Universal parks to become more family-friendly. It's obvious that Universal detects weakness in the Disney parks, and if they really want to swipe a good chunk of their market share, pursuing more attractions like this would be helpful in my opinion. Is that to say that Universal should stop building thrill rides? No, because they certainly have some of the best in the industry, and as I stated, balance in their park offerings is what is important here. Still, does Universal recognize this issue, and are they going to rectify it going forward? Well, let's take a look at their future plans. Earlier this year, Universal Studios Florida closed Shrek 4D, and the building is now being gutted for something new. It has been heavily rumored that this new attraction will be themed to Minions, and that it will likely be an interactive shooting experience on a moving walkway. Obviously, we have yet to see what Universal actually announces it to be, but considering that they've teased Minions on the construction walls and online, I think that the rumor seems pretty strong. If this is truly the case, the attraction doesn't really seem too appealing to me personally, but it is a step in the right direction of accessibility for both little children and older park guests, as well as adding a bit of variety into the attraction lineup. If we take a look at the new park, Epic Universe though, which is currently being built to the south of the current resort, we see more possible family attractions there. We know that Super Nintendo World has been officially announced, and that the Mario Kart attraction is a slower moving dark ride that only simulates speed. However, due to the nature of the ride vehicle, it does have a 42-inch height requirement. What surprised me was Yoshi's Adventure, which does have a 36-inch height requirement on what is essentially an Omnimover. I suppose it's different because of the restraint system, but this alienates really small children as well, which seems to be the target demographic. Of course, the rest of the park's attractions are just rumors at this point, but even they seem to be more thrill-oriented. The concept art shows a large dueling coaster in the hub, as well as lands possibly themed around Universal Monsters and the Wizarding World, which will likely be on the more thrilling side of things. It's possible that the land rumored to be based around How to Train Your Dragon will be more family-friendly, but I suppose we'll see. Some smaller attractions and indoor shows are rumored as well, but overall, I still feel that the park is shooting for a more mature family audience. That's not to say that it won't be successful as is, but it's also not necessarily the most direct competitor to Disney if it's pursuing mostly thrill-seeking families. I suppose that we should reserve judgment until the park opens, but I do wish that Universal would bring better attraction balance to the resort overall, including less physically intense dark rides and more sit-down shows. It's important for guest accessibility, but in also balancing out the park experience. I have to admit, I'm not really sure if the arguments for this video really resonates, so I'd be interested in hearing what other people think of this. Are Universal's parks too thrill ride oriented, and would they benefit from other sit-down shows and slower moving, more accessible dark rides? Let me know down in the comments. As always, I appreciate when people leave a like on the video, especially if you found it engaging. If you haven't already, I also recommend subscribing and hitting the bell icon so as to be alerted to new videos when they are released.